Welcome to Planet Poetry, the podcast for poets and poetry lovers. My name's Peter Kenny.
And I'm Robin Houghton. Now, in each episode, we interview a poet and ask them to share some of their work. Today, we're meeting Ruth Padel, who'll be talking about her latest book, Girl.
We'll also look at a new pamphlet from Siegfried Weber called The Twice Turned Earth and discover 52 ways of looking at a poem.
But first, let's hear what Ruth Padel had to say to Peter.
Ruth Padel's books include 13 acclaimed poetry collections, 2 novels, and a wide sweep of non-fiction. She lives in London, is a Fellow of both the Royal Society of Literature and Zoological Society of London, and currently Royal Literary Fund Fellow at Magdalen College, Cambridge. So, Ruth Padel, a warm welcome to Planet Poetry.
Thank you so much. I'm so looking forward to this, Peter.
So, first of all, I'd like to ask you, where in the world are you this morning on this wonderful poetic planet of ours?
I'm in Camden, London, very near Camden, London.
When I lived in London, I couldn't imagine living outside London because I thought it would be the outer darkness. Quite a shock to learn that there are things that happen outside London.
Yeah, well, I was born in London. There's so many pluses to living outside London, but this is where I was born. I know people here. I'm just used to it.
Yeah. Your new collection, Girl, has just been released into the wild, and it's from Chateau Poetry, which is now from Vintage. I've spent the last few days poring over it and absolutely absorbing it and loving it. I also cheated by listening to you talking on BBC Radio 4 on the Start the Week programme, I think it was, and I found that slightly terrifying. But your poetry collection has the deceptively simple title of Girl. Before we dive into your collection, it sounds like an appallingly naive question, but what for you is a girl?
Well, I kept asking myself that when I was writing these poems. And that's why I went back to look at, photographs of myself as a baby and my dad looking at me. And I felt, well, maybe you start to be a girl with the male gaze looking at you. But of course, your mother looks at you too. Then I realized that a girl always has to negotiate male violence. And I realised that a lot of the poems are about that. After all, the Annunciation, the story of Mary, it's shaped by this patriarchal divine will, and she has to see what they do to her son. And there's this kind of male violence in everything. I mean, when I first went to school, I lay on a rug in rest, which was an army rug. I had no idea, of course, what it was. But all the way through, you get different images and vestiges of what you have to deal with when you grow up.
Yeah.
But apart from that, a girl, traditionally in most countries, a girl is an image of vulnerability, of becoming, of adventure, knowing that you are vulnerable. And I think that's why a girl is an image of life, of the psyche, because we're all vulnerable, whether we like it or not, but we all want to adventure and explore.
Yeah, and so much of that vulnerability is always projected onto girls.
Exactly.
Just talking about a girl and reclaiming that idea from those centuries of their portrayal through the eyes of men. It's crazy, but this is actually a really radical idea.
And also it's becoming politically very, very acute now with what one journalist has called the broligarchy. As soon as Trump was elected, you get boys holding placards on a Texas campus saying, "Your body, my choice." Terrifying.
Absolutely
but it's
appalling.
So there beneath the surface.
Yeah. Well, can we dive into the poetry, You Girl, which is the first poem in your collection?
Yes, I started with the Annunciation because that is a teenage girl faced with a choice and an imposition. When the angel comes for you, you're on your own, always on your own, in some enclosed space, a bedroom, a garden, corner of a public library, reading, charging your phone, brushing your hair in the mirror. Stillness, then a trembling of the light. You could have said no. Is this what you wanted from your life? Relationship soaking in like oil in wood, all that dark involvement without knowing Why? You were alone, you thought, a bud on a winter stalk. Innocence, and behind, in green distance, some vision, or is it memory, of another angel chasing you out of a garden with a sword. But you don't say no. And there's a flash of luminescence, a dove streaming in through a window, a flood of real fear, and your heart in the cowl neck t-shirt from Primark suddenly convulsed. But your old life now seems dry as a stubbed cigarette. You are a chalice plugged with gold, vibrating to bells only you can hear.
I just think that ending is so astonishingly gorgeous.
Thank you.
It's a perfect opening poem for a collection, I think. But it was making me think of Rilke's Annunciation poem, the archangel coming down and sort of angel splaining to Mary that she was a tree and so on. But here, in your poem, suddenly the focus is Mary. You know, shockingly, we discover that she's got her own agency. You know, you could have said no. Which is sort of greatly at odds with this idea of a mild Mary obeying God. Was there a temptation to write this poem in the first person, to speak as Mary?
No, I went very, very much to painters.
Yeah.
So I was thinking there's a wonderful Fra Angelica Annunciation where you have Adam and Eve in the background because
Yes.
Mary is supposed traditionally to sort of reverse the fall. Reverse what Eve did. But then I saw a wonderful painting of a late 19th, early 20th century painter in America, the first black artist to be internationally respected, Henry Ottawa Turner. And the Annunciation there was just a pillar of light. And there's a girl in sort of peasant Mideastern dress sitting on a bed looking at this pillar of light that has suddenly appeared in her bedroom. And then there are other more recent painters who have done her in all sorts of different ways. Sometimes the angel is another woman. And you just realize the sheer surprise. What on earth is this coming into my life, my body, and my bedroom? Very, very odd. And I love that, the way that the painters have got it like that.
You have Mary that's literally been chosen to be the mother of God. And yet we never really see her depicted as being able to express power in other than this very submissive way. Why is the power of girls so difficult for the world to accommodate, do you think?
Well, when you say the world, you mean men.
Yes.
The patriarchy.
Yeah.
I suppose nobody wants to give up the privilege of their own power. Whether it's class or caste or riches, anything else. People don't want to share their privileges. Animals don't. In a hierarchical situation, an older wolf or an older chimpanzee is not going to give power to younger ones. And the males don't want to give it to females. But with boys, it's under the surface. I was thinking, I was just looking it up. In 1897, the Cambridge University had its first vote on whether to let women who had been admitted to doing the work actually receive their degrees.
Yeah.
And the undergraduates did not want them to. Two women's colleges had been already made, Newnham and Girton, and sometimes the women were getting better marks than the men, but they weren't allowed to receive their degrees. And the undergraduates were rioting outside the place where all the dons were deliberating. And when the vote went against them, the undergraduates, a day and a half of rioting, they smashed things, they threw rockets through windows, they hung the effigy of a new girl, a new woman in bloomers on a bicycle. They hung her from a corner of a bookshop and then finally decapitated it. I mean, that level of violence, in a supposedly civilized country.
That's appalling.
It's still there under the surface. And it's so I was thinking of that when I saw the things on the Texas campus on November the 6th. Boys do not want girls to outperform them. They do not want them to share their privileges. I don't mean that all boys, but I mean that seems to be the default position under most patriarchal systems.
Gosh, I didn't know about that incident. That sounds absolutely appalling.
Women were not allowed to receive the degrees they'd worked for until 1948.
Yes.
Isn't that amazing?
Yes.
In Cambridge, that is.
The first part of the book, we kind of follow the progress of Mary through all the different stages of the rosary, as it were. I'd like you to read His Spine.
Yes, all through the passion and the story, I kept thinking, what was it like for her? What was it like for this girl who didn't ask to have this baby and then looked after it? And now to see him tortured and killed like this. I kept thinking about that. But it's so big that you had to do it very sparely.
Mm.
His Spine. The man with mallet and spike drills through your child's palm, where the life curve crosses the line of the heart, and the ulnar nerve begins its delicate run. 3 in the afternoon, hour of rest on a summer farm, hour when school children are let out to go home. His breath trying to enter the lungs, his spine a zip of bone trying to keep together what's falling apart.
I find this poem absolutely astonishing, that that this pivotal moment in the Christian story, you can convey so much with the image of a zip. I mean, it's absolutely, it's so, the sense of the world falling apart, being halved and just crumpling into the audacity and brilliance of that. It's one of those perfect examples of less being hugely more.
I'm so glad you like it, Peter. I mean, people respond so differently to different poems in a collection. I sometimes think that the natural relationship is one person, one poem. And that's one of the reasons that Poems on the Underground is so good. Somebody hanging there in the tube in the rush hour sees one small poem, and it makes a real difference. But then I think poems in a collection, then different people have different reactions, and there are kind of ripples from each one.
Yeah. And just returning to a book, just how different poems leap out at you. I mean, it's, sometimes you feel like you're reading an entirely different collection just because of the way you've changed in the interim.
Yes.
So let's delve under your bed.
Photos from under the bed. I pull them out of a suitcase. Spit curls of myself. Cloudy proof of girls I have been. Maybe still am. And think of a dipterocarp seed on the rainforest floor. A wee scrotum self. How it unfurls. How it steps forward, choosing to risk, lose, explore. Little soul, you have wandered a long time, and now see a door standing open. At night, the bloop of a text lights up the cell phone, rousting me from sleep, asking me to click these ruby slippers that have somehow blossomed on my feet. Yes, now I look back. It was all explore.
I was intrigued by the dipterocarp seed and this kind of idea, a wee scrotum self, how it unfurls, and how that sort of sense of yourself as this kind of big, gnarly seed bursting into life, but the scrotum self is so unexpected and wrong footing and just wonderful, other than just being brilliant. Why did you choose that word?
Well, I suppose a scrotum is just a little bag, isn't it, really? It's a container bag for so much power. At the moment, I'm doing research for a book on elephants, particularly Asian elephants, and I went to Borneo, and there are these big dipterocarp trees, which are the foundation of any rainforest, really, and they're huge. They go up to 80 feet, 100 feet, But the seed is so small, and actually it powers everything. One of these rainforest seeds is keeping the world going, because it's the oxygen that these huge trees put into the atmosphere that keeps us going. And I thought, this is so much power from such a little thing. And I just picked it up on the forest floor. It was damp, it was muddy, the trees are enormous. So it was this sense of, well, I suppose comes back to power. And so much of my book, I realised at the end, is about power. The very last poem, when can I read those lines about
Sure, please,
power?
yeah.
Because it seems, I mean, it's addressed to a friend of mine, a wonderful friend of mine, who did a lot for poetry in this country. She was American, Daphne Astor, and she was part of the poetry school. She was on the board of the poetry school. She also started a wonderful press, ecological press called Hazel Press, and she died earlier this year. So the book's dedicated to her. This last poem is particularly dedicated to her. Starts, listening to the snow melt of the patriarchy. Well, unfortunately, the snow melt's been a bit halted by now. But reckoning the scars left by its 10,000 tentacle reach into our minds, which we have laughed about, you and I, but mourned all our lives. And the violence is still, well, there is always the question of power. And girl is a trajectory of learning how to deal with it. I think how girl is in you still these last days. So it was talking to her in that poem, really, was thinking about how girls still have to deal with the patriarchy and its power.
Yes.
So the scrotum self was also the power of life.
Yeah. On the BBC recently, you were sort of saying something to the effect that girlhood is not just a phase of life, it's something that you carry inside you, almost like the child being father of the man in Wordsworth's terms. That last poem you read from the end of the book carries that through, doesn't it? That, you know, even as your friend is, you know, nearing the end of her life, that you're both still girls, as it were.
Yeah, there was a poem that we thought of in the end, we discarded, because it was called Girls' Night Out. There was quite a lot of journalism last year about why does women sometimes refer to themselves as girls, and how demeaning it is, how they shouldn't, and all sorts of columnists were writing this. And one woman journalist wrote, "Can't I buy a bloody hair bow without reflecting what it means to be a woman?" Because what is girly? What is a girl's night out? But I was thinking about that too, and some of the lines from that said, "A girl is the totemic self that dances, that has fun, learns to deal with blood, the soul that suffers on the path to love, knowing something enormous lies ahead, but is also a freelance spirit." And then girl is before the underworld journey, the choices you have to make and can't take back. Drinks with the girls is not having to think just for a night about all the worries for other people. Just be a girl tonight. And so I suppose my idea at that point in that poem was girl is in you, but it's overlaid by everything else. But you can still let her out for a night.
And why not? I want to ask you to read The Dark Place That Speaks When You Sing.
Did I sleepwalk through school? The khaki rug I lay on in rest, with owl eye brass rings at the edge. Where was it from? What had it seen? I didn't ask. Why did Mr. Allen, headmaster, shut some girls in a cupboard? Only blondes, said my friend Dinah, whose hair was mouse done. He has a complex, she said. I hardly said anything. I was too dark to be shut in cupboards, and each moment at school was a mystery I was too shy to talk in, except when we sang. The ash grove, Allen Water, early one morning, banks and braes, foggy dew. I loved the tunes, but never asked why all the girls were forsaken and forlorn. Maybe the question lay too deep. Why all this dying and crying? Even today, when something I really need to ask snags on some unsayable wrong. I feel my throat closing and furring, and I know there is danger in the depths. The larynx I depend on is trying to protect me. I have to press down in my belly and do what I found to do then, when all I knew was my voice floating easy and free on the melody, soaring in light air where nobody got forsaken or shut in cupboards. And my throat said, okay, this was mine to do. Let the space within open, right down to the true, clear cave of the soul that speaks when I sing.
Yeah, that's just so lovely. I mean, that power that comes from singing and being with others, and that strange context of like seedy, slightly weird things going on in the school, and that sort of unpleasantness of the blondes being taken away and so on. Also, the form in this, every line it's on 3 lines. The first 2 fragments kind of step down, there's a bottom line, and then it rises up 2 steps, so that it looks like, well, a series of smiles or musical notes in a repeating pattern, or bowl, a bird even. I spent quite a ridiculously long time looking at those and wondering about them. So there's so many interesting choices of form in this book. What drives your choice of form? Is it when you meet an individual poem, it demands to be written that way, or do you have a preordained sense of wanting to do something?
I never have a preordained sense. No, what the poem wants to do is, it's very useful and very common for poets to have a sense of the poem having its own agency, because then it's not you doing it. It's not you doing it. You're not responsible. You have to let it be what it wants. But I think of these as perhaps as little bowls, yes, or also maybe a spoon with 2 handles. But I wanted that sense of a depth, because it is about going down to the deep.
Yes.
When I discovered this form, it seemed to work, though it was a sort of nightmare to get the words to behave on the page. And then I and my editor Sarah, we didn't quite know how to help readers realize that you go down and then up again in the line, in the verse, as it were. And then we hit on the idea of making the title do it too. And once the title does it too, you can see how to read it. It is what happens. You can perhaps sometimes hear it in my voice. For about 12 years now, maybe I overused my voice, and I've had training about it. But it's I think the mucus that builds up and sometimes makes my voice grainy is about protection. And it never happens when I sing. I can sing to you fine. That graininess won't appear. It's extraordinary. I don't know why that is. It's as if singing is freedom.
Because literally you're finding a voice in this poem. What's the relationship for you between singing and writing poetry? Were you beginning to write poetry at the same time you began to sing? Or
Yes, I loved poetry, and I knew it somehow by heart. I mean, my mum used to read me the Jungle Book, and there were also the poems in the Jungle Book as well as the stories. And I somehow knew them by heart without trying to. They went in, and it was that the line here, that was mine to do, as it were. And, I had a big fat black book called The Book of 1,000 Poems, and I liked animals very much. So I knew all the animal poems by heart. I didn't try to. It just happened like that.
Yeah.
And it was the same with singing. Mr. Allen, this sort of weirdo headmaster, he also got us to sing. So I do remember all those folk songs. And then I had a piano teacher for a while. She was Jamaican. She was an amazing woman who later went back to Jamaica, but she was called Olive Lewin, a wonderful woman who sort of went and collected the folk songs of Jamaica and sang and got choirs singing in prisons and all sorts of things. She was supposed to teach me my little pieces, and I didn't practice, and I was a pain as a student. But she bribed me. She knew I loved singing. And I had a little book called the Penguin Songbook. So I would learn a song, and she would promise to accompany me singing it if I learnt my piece. So she was very important to me, Olive Lewin.
Yeah. Well, it's great. These pivotal teachers are so important. Yeah. I'm going to change the mood a little now and ask you to read Remembering My Husband Weeping at Something I Wrote When I Was 8.
I wasn't at all expecting this poem to come out. I don't know where it came from. It was because this central section, which is my life as a girl and thinking about, my daughters, my moms and so on, then looking at girls around me, girls in Camden at midnight, what it's like to be a girl now.
Yeah.
And this poem just came up by accident out of it. Remembering my husband weeping at something I wrote when I was 8. I opened my copy of Tarka the Otter and remember how you burst into tears when you saw what I'd written in this probably valuable first edition handed down by my granny, because I didn't agree with the end and wasn't going to let the hero die. Maybe the bubbles in the river did disappear, like the closing words designed to trickle cleverly down the page. But it was clear he did not drown. No, Tarka escaped to join his mate. I look at my wobbly letters and remember sitting for 8 hours by your bed before you died. I feel your warmth again, how you cherished a child's heart, my heart, as a girl doing my best to stop fate.
Yeah. That's such a... I love that poem so much. I mean, there's so many things in it. The desire to take control of the narrative and fate itself, but the depiction of a relationship of, your husband who had enough empathy to burst into tears at seeing your wish for a better future. It's just one of the most beautiful love poems I can remember reading, actually. But just so beautiful. Oh, gosh.
Thank you.
I wish I had a more kind of chin-stroking intellectual response to that, but it's just...
No, it's the feeling is what matters, and it's being connected to it. I was reading Billie Holiday talking about singing, and she said if you take a song and if it's something to do with your life, you feel connected to it, and then other people feel it too, and that's what matters.
Yeah, it made me think about there is a tension between trying to assert your own imagination, your ending to the story, and the way reality feels short. And this book about Girl, that idea at a time when women's rights are really being challenged by Trump and, in every other country that you look at. We're in a time when those gains that we seem to have made at the end of the last century are now being eroded again.
But the imaginatively, it's always there. Take the film The Wizard of Oz. I mean, I mentioned the slippers. The slippers.
Yeah.
I mean, Dorothy is a team leader. She gets her little band of people, the Cowardly Lion and the Scarecrow and the Tin Man. She takes them down the yellow brick road. She takes them on, and finally they do get what they desire.
Yeah.
She's trying to get the team to its goal. And she's and that's that was written very early on. It was written the girl as a leader, an inspirer, and somebody who can bring hope to everybody. It's been there forever.
Yes.
As an image, as a story in our hearts.
Yeah. Well, Joan of Arc, for example, is another. As we move on through your collection, things get a bit snaky. I'd like you to read Serpent Queen on the 88.
Serpent Queen on the 88. Rock Shop. Lily White's. Piccadilly. Eros kicks his bare ankle in the air at the heart of my city. And the Serpent Queen fixes me with her basilisk stare from a TV ad on the side of the bus I have just stepped out of. I remember a circus in a field outside Skopje, a trapeze artiste and 2 engorged yellow pythons squeezing her breasts, neck and thighs. It took 4 other girls in sequin leotards to drape each one around her. Why do men want to see naked girls fooling with snakes? All I know is the snake goddess telling her tale straight to camera in stiff black brocade. Having died, she tells me, all the way back to the root, I grow again. The serpent of the unconscious has a wisdom of its own, and I am the treasure it guards. Wings of a black ruff rise up behind her. Touch her, and you'd shiver at powers of the earth, which men from some dark room unease of their souls load onto a girl. Punishment, Hades, fast cars, undrinkable rivers, and a woman's body at the centre of the world.
Wow, that's such a complicated twining, like 2 snakes entwined, this idea of female power and male objectification. And I just love that sort of urban setting of just hopping off a bus and then being confronted by a snake goddess, as it were.
Yes.
But, this idea about, what is it about snakes and why do men want to see naked girls fooling with snakes? I mean, I want to steer clear of a kind of leery Freudian interpretation of that. But the snakes in your collection are definitely a source of empowerment. So what is your take on snakes and girls?
All these snake goddess poems came from a commission for a really wonderful project called The Many Lives of a Snake Goddess, organised by 3 women archaeologists. And they invited me to write poems for it. And this is because the 2 snake goddesses, I've got them here if you see them.
So one of them is a bare-breasted woman with her arms aloft, one of them clutching a snake, and the other one has a sort of snake motif on her dress. They both look like bell-shaped people.
Yeah, bell-shaped people. I love that. Yes, yes. So they both have bare breasts. Really, one's much taller than the other. The one with sort of more bulgy breasts is brandishing two snakes aloft, and she was the one. They came from Minoan Crete, 1600 BC,
yes.
and it was the one brandishing the snakes that was imitated when Athens had its Olympics in 2004. She led the procession.
Wow. Yes.
But she may well not have been like that at all, because she was discovered in 1902 by a male archaeologist called Arthur Evans, and they were discovered all smashed up in fragments, and he reconstituted them. And he thought one of them was the goddess, the bigger one was the goddess and was maternal, and the bulgy one with brandishing snakes was her votary, was just a girl, he said. And these are made up. These are part of a sort of whole thrust in the late 19th century and early 20th century of women and snakes, bare breasts, snakes, thighs, all the rest of it. And, that was all male creation. So they may not have looked like that at all, and they may not even be goddesses at all. But it's met our own imagination full-heartedly, I guess. It's inescapable now. So the Serpent Queen on the back of that bus feeds right into it. And of course it draws on Eve and the serpent.
Yes.
And I think we might go back to what we said earlier about power. I think men ascribe such wisdom and power to women, a power that comes from the earth, from the hiddenness of their bodies, from the flesh of their bodies, and they're to men mysterious experience. But they want to control that power, I suppose. I mean, and so they associate it with all sorts of things, the women's body at the center of the world, and Hades and punishment. And you remember Lear says, "But to the girdle do the gods inherit, beneath is all the pit," or something.
Yeah.
And, so there's a sort of disgust and unwilling reverence and fear and awe, all mixed up, it seems to me. But then I'm a girl, what do I know? In men's psyches about womanhood and what women's knowledge and wisdom is, and what women's power is. It seemed to me that the Serpent Queen there was an ad for a television program, just summed it all up. Particularly at Piccadilly, where you get Eros hanging around.
Yes. That idea of the archaeologist in Crete, piecing bits together to fit his own imagination and Victorian notions of.
Well, this project, which is online, you can look at it. The Many Lives of the Snake Goddess goes into all sorts of things about what is the inheritance of that, what's the legacy of that. They ask people to write in with their tattoos of women and snakes, and they were just really, really interested in the legacy of the woman and snake motif.
I've been thinking a lot about Genesis recently and rereading it. That whole business of the serpent, of sort of God leaving these two unfortunates alone with his kind of most slithery, evilest creation.
Oh, but of course, God didn't really do that. God made a snake in Genesis, but it was the devil who went into the serpent. The serpent wasn't like that to begin with. I wrote a book called Where the Serpent Lives. So I thought about snakes for a long time because I was doing all this research. Snakes are very vulnerable to roadkill, for instance. And they did try, and the fossil record shows that they tried growing legs twice in the fossil record, but then they gave it up in favour of their slitheriness. But it does make them vulnerable as well.
Mm. Well, that's an education in itself. Thank you. Well, those are imaginary and legendary snakes. This poem, Snake Wrangling in the Wild, which is actually you with a real snake. And it's one of those poems that has got this beautiful visual design to it. So it's a snake that slithers across 2 pages. Would you read that for us, please?
Snake Wrangling in the Wild. Let it flow, said my guide, from the Irula, people of the dark. Let it ribbon and stream through your hands. Don't clutch, it will turn and bite. Its reptile brain wants to keep moving. Never mind that it never gets anywhere. He scooped a slim, bronze-checkered snake from the roots of a banyan tree. He rippled it to his hands as if it was raw silk. He smiled. He loved it. He poured it like a gold sleeve into my hand. It felt heavier than I expected, a smooth thread of almost warm steel, flowing, searching, like the memory of a lost relationship with the earth. But so calm.
That's lovely. I like this picture of you being the one brandishing the snake aloft in this poem, like one of your goddesses.
Yes. But it wasn't aloft exactly. I was just holding it through my hand. Of course, it wasn't a poisonous snake. It was a wild one. Mm. The Irula, are people who work actually it's in a reptile and crocodile bank south of Chennai, Old Madras. Mm. And they catch these snakes in order to harvest the poison. They hold a wine glass up and then they entice the snake so it lunges and strikes, and its 2 top fangs, which release the venom, go into this little membrane over the wine glass and pour down the side. So they catch the venom, and then they can make anti-venom out of it, because these snakes kill a lot of people by accident every year. And then they release the snakes back into the wild. So that's why they're catching them. They're a snake catching tribe. I wanted to know what it was like. So I went out with them into the fields and the ditches where all these poisonous snakes are. And he caught a non-poisonous one to show me how to hold it. Yeah. And it is extraordinary because, it doesn't realize that it's not getting out. You just let it stream through your fingers like a moving ribbon. Of course, if you stopped it, then it would turn and bite. And even a bite from a non-venomous snake, you don't want that to happen, really.
Yeah, I have held a snake as well, and a mixed feeling. Being a kind of distinct life form from you that you don't necessarily get from holding a cat or a mammal of, that sense of its legless otherness.
They move, they travel on the tips of their ribs. Mm. If you saw the skeleton as it's moving along, the locomotion on the tips of their ribs, extraordinary.
I'd like to end our conversation on a serpent note. But Ruth Padel, it's been such a delight talking to you today, and thank you so much for giving your time to Planet Poetry.
Peter, thank you so much, and long may you planetize out into the skies.
Well, I've been really looking forward to this interview with Ruth Padel. I thought that was really fascinating. She's got so much to say, hasn't she? And the wealth of her background.
I enjoyed how unexpectedly snaky it was.
The first poem, You Girl, that was a great one to start with, actually. Is that at the start of the book?
Yes, that's the first poem in the book, an Annunciation poem where Gabriel comes down to Mary and says, "You're the lucky winner."
This Mary has a kind of an agency, doesn't she? So she's, she could have said no. And I think, didn't Ruth refer to the painting?
Fra Angelico, yeah. I used to have that picture on my study wall many years ago. I've always been quite fascinated by the idea of the Annunciation.
Yes.
There's a poem by Rilke called Annunciation, which I think I mentioned in the difference between Rilke's poem and Ruth's poem is just the fact that she's inhabiting Mary and seeing it from Mary's point of view rather than it's something I said about angel-splaining, but, the angel coming down and telling her what her role is going to be and how marvellous she is.
You asked a question, didn't you? Did you think of putting it in the first person?
Yeah.
And she was quite emphatic that she didn't want to do that, wasn't she?
I was interested by that, actually. I mean, a lesser poet such as myself would have been tempted to try and inhabit the person that it's happening to. But the idea that, the girl takes on the responsibility anyway, even knowing that she could have said no, that there's a sense of her just accepting the responsibility. She was talking about the power of girls as well, and that sense of the saying yes and taking on all the difficulty of the situation, but also somehow being powerful in it as well. What did you think about her thinking about girls? Did it feel like familiar territory? Or
familiar territory in a way? We can't avoid the subject, really, a woman's place in the world and girlhood. And yes, certainly I often look at my past, my upbringing. I can draw some parallels, or I can trace things back and think that shaped me or that didn't shape me. And I had brothers. I went to a girls' school. So this idea of being a girl and a girl's role in the world was very top of mind, I think, even when I was quite young. I'm sure that's a common feeling. When I was listening, I was thinking how you felt about it. I was thinking, how does this feel for a man? Does not a boy? I don't know.
Why I liked it so much was it was making me think of, myself as a boy as well, and the kind of expectations and the kind of weirdness of being a boy. This idea of, she's talking about the patriarchy and so on. And, as a man, you can't help feeling, well, I haven't really done very much to promote the patriarchy in my life, but
it's not my fault.
But then, it's sort of collective, isn't it? But,
certainly in that second poem that she read,
His Spine. Fantastic.
And there was and there was a really interesting comment where she said she believes in one person, one poem. It's a natural relationship is with a single reader, and it's going to be different depending on who's reading it. I thought that seems like it should be an obvious thing, but actually I don't think I've ever heard someone say it that way. And I just thought, that's absolutely right, isn't it?
Well, if you compare it to, say, Danez Smith, who we met earlier on in the series, that feels like it's one person to many almost, that, that there's an expectation that there's an audience, and perhaps that derives from their starting reading as performances and expecting there to be an audience. Whereas this is much more intimate.
Yes, that's very interesting. I hadn't thought about that, whether or not one's expecting an audience.
Although Ruth, I guess, with her singing and so on, as well as her being a famous poet, is used to audiences. But that poem, His Spine, is so small and deft, and it hinges on this image of a zip. His spine, a zip of bone, trying to keep together what is falling apart. The end of the crucifixion, but being on such a small, deft little image. I just, every now and again, Ruth's audacity, because I think it's really audacious to be doing, something so portentous and important to so many people with such a everyday image, but it just works brilliantly.
Yes, it speaks of confidence, doesn't it? Confidence and experience. And in fact, how the poem looks on the page is also lovely because it's quite short couplets, isn't it? So there's a lot of space. It's almost like a kind of a spine, like a series of the bones of the spine, and it has this connected and yet very malleable look to it.
Yeah. Maybe quite a trivial sort of thought, but I love the idea of Ruth's mum reading her the Jungle Book and her kind of internalising the rhymes from that, but how she felt so clearly in a happy place writing about snakes and thinking about snakes. And
yes, that's funny, isn't it? Because actually that came up when she read Serpent Queen on the 88 and that overtly about, what did she say? One of her snake goddess poems.
Yeah.
And there's a short, you spoke a bit about that. And it's funny because I was thinking, oh yes, I like snakes. I've always quite liked the feel of snakes, like when you go to a place and they put one on you, try out this boa constrictor. Or whatever. And it's just like the touch of them and the feel of them moving on your body, I find quite lovely, really. And yet my other half, I thought of snakes, like, God, you won't get anywhere near one. So maybe it's something, maybe women have a rapport with snakes. And does it all go back to the fall, the fall of man? It's all down to that woman and the flipping snake.
Well, I was trying to steer clear of Freud and with his
very
monomania about
good.
sex and things. I didn't really want to go there.
You did very well too.
It was the open goal.
Absolutely. You didn't go for it. Well done. What restraint. I admired that.
But she was.
You did an excellent job.
She was very graceful and a lovely person to speak to.
I definitely enjoyed that, and it made me pick up other works by her, but more on that later.
So I have in my hand The Twice Turned Earth, a new pamphlet by Siegfried Weber, and it's from Poetry Salzburg pamphlet series. Imagine my surprise when I flipped it over to the back and there was a quote from one Robin Houghton recommending the contents.
Well, we love Siegfried, don't we? He was one of our telltale poets back in the day.
The collection that we published then, When Love Comes to the Cartoon Kid.
Oh, yes.
It was full of Americana and American-inflected imagery. It was very distinct and unusual. This, however, is quite different. I mean, a lot of it is rooted in this country. I think what we both loved about Siegfried's work in the beginning was the sort of clarity of imagery, and, it seems extremely effortless in some ways, but, very realised. And there's one poem in it called Matthew, which I'd like to share. Matthew. You kept your limited edition Han Solo in its original packaging. Sometimes I'd come round after school and we'd just look at it together, examining every detail through that small plastic window. Blaster pistol, snow boots, 4 fully posable limbs, like some relic manufactured and vacuum-packed for square-eyed devotions. Almost 2 decades dead and gone. That's now what you've become to me, a strange collectible grief, a keepsake taken down from the attic and scrutinized for signs of wear and tear, for loss of value. But each time nothing changes, not a single day older than your priceless 13 years, you remain in pristine condition. Once more I carefully weigh the shape and size of your leaving, find myself checking memories for hallmarks, struggling to confirm the authenticity of your absence with an expert's grown-up eye. And the most valuable pieces are still always missing. No miniature blaster pistol, simply an empty hand clutching thin air like a child several galaxies away. You have left me kneeling alone on the bedroom floor, only words to play with. So, lovely poem, that, isn't it?
It is lovely. And I was just thinking, I think Cartoon Kid, his pamphlet must be, well, if it's not 10 years ago, it's getting on for it, isn't it? And I think,
Yes.
it shows how he's matured. I think it's a really beautiful poem of loss. And again, it had his hand solo in its original packaging. We're straight into Babyland, aren't we? It's not your average poem of loss. It's just done really beautifully, I think.
Yeah. I used to live next door to a man in his perhaps 40 who had his whole dining room was a massive collection of Star Wars memorabilia. It was quite bizarre.
Really? Was it still in its packaging?
It was, yeah.
That's another thing, isn't it? I do remember actually in a former life, I had this husband many years ago, and he was into collecting model buses, and he taught me about how, the best sort of model was mint and boxed. Mint and boxed, and a lot of people never took them out the box, and that made them more valuable. And I just thought, well, don't you want to look at it? I want to take it out of the box. Like, no, keep it in the box. But anyway, that's taken us away from this poem, and I think there's some really lovely work in this book.
Yeah, I admire the way that he's paced his publications as well. This is a second full pamphlet, but it's just very satisfying to read. And it's those kind of poems that you read once, you can sort of get what they're on about, but then they repay return visits as well. So it's
Indeed.
very accessible, but
very accessible, but lots of references. I mean, very broad scope of allusions and really interesting to read. Who's that published by again?
That's published by Poetry Salzburg Pamphlet Series number 40.
Ah, excellent.
Oh, look, there's an endorsement from Martin Malone, who we had on here recently as well, on the back, so that's all good. So, Robin, I understand that interview with Ruth Padel has driven you back to an old favourite.
It has. Like I said before, I've been looking forward to this interview because quite a few years ago, when I was first starting to try and write poetry seriously, I picked up a book by Ruth, which is called 52 Ways of Looking at a Poem. Mm. In actual fact, it's not 52 ways of looking at one poem. It's 52 poems. And what she's done, actually, this is back in 2002. This was first published.
Yeah.
And what she's done is she's picked out 52 poets and from each of them an exemplar poem. And what she does is she'll give you a few details about the poet, when they were born or the context in which they were writing. And then she goes in to talk about this actual one poem in great detail. And it's just marvellous.
Yeah.
It's not difficult to understand. It breaks it down. It explains this is what the poet's done here and this is why she did it, or this is the effect she was after and you can hear that in these words. Or it's just brilliant. For me, it was like it was just a real education, and I still go back to it a lot. It's almost like a creative writing MA in a book. There's so many light bulb moments. You think, yeah, I see why that happens. I see why that works.
Yeah.
Rather than just being told, oh, that's a half rhyme, or, oh, that's a so-and-so, oh, lots of S words, because it's water. It's very specific and it's very clever. And I just thought, wow, this is the bee's knees.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got it as well. And I remember really enjoying it some 20 years ago, but,
yeah.
You've really inspired me to snatch it down off my shelves again.
And it's so nice that you can just go in and pick out one poet, one poem. And it's something I think, gosh, I've never really got Paul Muldoon or something. So I pull it out and have a look. And that's the one I've opened now and I'm looking at. And it's it just makes it all so much more, it makes it accessible. It makes you feel, yes, I could do something like that. But it also does, for me anyway, it puts me in awe of the craft that these great poets have put into their work.
Yeah.
So highly recommended, I think, for anybody who's writing poetry.
I think it was reflected in Ruth's poems, wasn't it? I really felt I was talking to somebody that was fully in control of their own art and really, really knew what they were doing.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
That's quite humbling, I think.
And the other thing, of course, that her claim to fame, as it were, is that she is the great, great granddaughter of Charles Darwin.
Oh, crikey. Maybe I should have said something about that when I was talking to her.
No. I think it's good you didn't, because she probably gets that all the time. So it's refreshing. You want to talk about her book, which is very nice, I think. Yeah. But I was reminded of that, and I went to her website, and I was reminded of that because she wrote this book, Darwin: A Life in Poems.
Yeah.
I hadn't read it, but I looked through the reviews, and I just thought, actually, yeah, I want to read that. And I've just ordered it this morning. It is literally a kind of, I suppose it's kind of a hybrid. It sounds like it's poems, but I think there's other notes as well and information. And it literally talks about Darwin's life and the fact that he was married. His wife was very religious, and how that worked with him becoming gradually less religious because of the work that he did on evolution. It just sounds fascinating. So I'm looking forward to reading that. Shall I just give you a little taster of 52 ways of looking at a poem?
That would be
for
great.
People who perhaps haven't seen it.
Playing on that Wallace Stevens poem, isn't it? Is it 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird?
Is that right? See, what do I know?
In that poem, he was looking at a blackbird and writing 13 different poems in almost different styles.
Okay.
So that was quite very modernist. That's all I've got to say about it.
I didn't know that.
Worth reading.
I've opened the book at Paul Muldoon. This poem from 1983 called Quoof. Is it Quoof? How do you pronounce that?
Is it Quoof?
Yeah. Is it Quoof or Quoof?
Yeah, I'd go with Quoof.
Quoof? I'm more of a woof person than Quoof, Quoof. Anyway, that's what it's called.
It's a dog's haircut.
It's quite short, and I'll read the poem and then just a couple of little things that she says about it. Quoof. How often have I carried our family word for the hot water bottle to a strange bed, as my father would juggle a red-hot half-brick in an old sock to his childhood settle. I have taken it into so many lovely heads, or laid it between us like a sword. A hotel room in New York City, with a girl who spoke hardly any English, my hand on her breast, like the smouldering one-off spore of the Yeti, or some other shy beast that has yet to enter the language.
The spore of a Yeti?
Yeah, spore of the Yeti. So Ruth talks a bit about his background, and she introduces this poem. I just wanted to read this one little section here. She's talking about half rhyme. She says, Muldoon has opened up the scope of poetry today by expanding away from obvious rhymes towards near rhyme, imperfect rhyme, unaccented rhyme, half rhyme, vowel rhyme, consonant rhyme. These rhymes are, in the poem, word and sword, bottle and settle, brick, sock, bed, heads, city, Yeti, breast, beast, English, language. None, not even bed and heads, are straight rhymes. This is not only technical playfulness. The way rhyme is used in a poem has to serve its implications and meaning, and rhyme is essentially about identity and difference. The likeness of the rhyming syllables, consonants, or vowels points at their difference in both their sound, their beginnings are different, their endings are somehow the same, and their meaning. Part of the point of rhyme is to provoke the listener to respond to that playoff between identity and difference. In Muldoon, it is as if his whole project, the way he deploys rhyme, is to show how everything, words, things, worlds, is vitally related but also vitally different. In this poem, the two things that are rhymed and related, the same but different, are male sexuality and language.
Well, that's a bravura interpretation. Wonderful,
It is, and bravura, that's a good word for it, isn't it? This is this confidence that she has to be able to bring her understanding and knowledge to any of these poems in such a way that it's not completely, it's not opaque. It's not, I don't read that and think, oh God, I don't get the feeling I have when I read an academic textbook about poetics. I sort of think, oh, okay. And I look again at the poem and you think, oh yes, that's right. Bottle, settle, and then what she said about being the same but different. I just thought that's a good example of what this book is full of for me.
And how you can infer from it that lots of things are connected, subtly through half rhymes, and the world somehow all links together. There's a strange vision of the world that comes from just that short poem. The Yeti spore thing that's such a bold and weird thing to write.
It is. I mean, and she goes on for another page and a half in great detail about, and she mentions the Yeti. Yeti is also a snowman. Strange beds may be exotic. The heads may be lovely. And yet, and Yeti, you may be cold as snow in them. It's so lovely anyway. I can't speak highly enough of the book.
Well, makes me think that she should be doing this podcast.
We are the conduit, we are bringing people like Ruth Padel to our audience.
So look at this marble.